Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you may recognise me. I've been coming here to this exhibition for about 14 years. My name is Chris Oldfield and I'm the Managing Director of Riverside Waste Machinery, and we supply unto shredders into the UK, and we have a number of these now in the market in the AD field. I'm passionate about waste to energy, and I'm delighted today to be able to chair this conference with four very eminent members of the industry, and we'd obviously like to ask them questions about hype, hero, or, as pointed out to me today, heroin. So what's today all about? Well, anaerobic digestion has been around for many years now, but it's in the past sort of 12 or 18 months that this waste methodology has become a hot topic. So what I'd like to do is to introduce the panel of experts and open the debate a little bit. So first of all, on my far right we have Paul Sanderson, and Paul is the editor of the innovative new digital publication Waste to Energy and the soon to be launched magazine Secondary Commodity Markets. Having spent, with one on the table, yes indeed, having spent over 6 years editing EMAP's MRW magazine, Paul has a very broad understanding of an ever-expanding knowledge of recycling and waste management issues within the UK and beyond. Next to Paul, we have another Paul called Paul Davidson. Now Paul and I have been on a conference before. Paul is the Managing Director of Proteus PR, and Paul has become a highly active and well-respected speaker within the environmental sector. He's recently returned from Australia, where he chaired a conference on renewable energy. And the other thing that's really impressive is that Proteus has been involved with £3 billion worth of development within the energy and waste management sector. Also next to Paul we have Charlotte Morton. Charlotte is the Chief Executive of the Anaerobic Digestion Biogas Association, which has been established to facilitate the development of a mature AD industry in the UK within 10 years. She was also the founder of pay-by-the-hour car hire business Whizgo, and a former corporate lawyer. Charlotte is an incredibly passionate environmental entrepreneur. And then, last but not least, we have Andrew Needham. Andrew is an established expert in AD technology and application. Andrew is also the operations director at Biogen Greenfinch, which is a company that designs, builds, owns and operates commercial scale anaerobic digestion plants for processing food waste. Andrew's farming and AD expertise means his specialist advice on new industry developments is highly sought after. Andrew is also a director of Bedfordia Farms, which is one of the top 20 largest farms in the UK. So, anaerobic digestion, hype, hero or heroin. So what I'd like to do is to give you all an idea of what today is all about. We've got to know the experts a little bit. What can we learn? And then at the end I'd like to get you all involved if we possibly can. So I'd like to start the debate by asking Charlotte first of all, please. For the uninitiated, what is AD? Why is anaerobic digestion important for the UK? Charlotte.
Anaerobic digestion. Is this working? Is it? Okay. Does this work? No?
Sorry?
Is it working now? Better? Great. Anaerobic digestion, for those, put very simply, it's a biological process that breaks down organic wastes in an atmosphere that has no oxygen to generate a form of biogas and renewable fertilizers. It's very similar to the process that's going on in your stomachs now, presuming you've all had lunch. and a very natural process that has very considerable benefits to the UK. We all have to deal with treating the organic waste that we generate. AD therefore is first and foremost an excellent waste treatment process. It has the huge advantage of generating a renewable form of gas. It's one of the few renewable forms of gas that we have. Most other renewables generate electricity. It also recycles the nutrients that we have in our waste food, and allowing them to be recycled back to land in the form of biofertilizers. As many of you, I'm sure, know, commercial fertilizers are immensely energy intensive and contribute over 1% of our greenhouse gas emissions, in total UK greenhouse gas emissions. So in terms of, for UK PLC, AD has a potential to generate about 40 terawatt hours of constantly generated renewable energy. That's equivalent to approximately 20% of the UK's domestic gas demand. As I said, it's a renewable gas. We don't have many sources of renewable gas. The UK is very focused on generating renewable electricity, but you cannot fuel big trucks, for example, on electricity. You need something like biomethane and using that as a transport fuel. So AD can offer things that other renewables can't do, in brief.
Charlotte, often it's not understood, but is there any difference between biogas and the natural gas that is in our pipelines and comes into our individual houses?
Biogas is the gas that you get generated from the AD process. Its composition is about 40% carbon dioxide and about 60% biomethane. And biomethane is very similar in composition to natural gas.
Natural gas.
So yes, there are a few differences, but it's very minor. So once you've cleaned up biogas to biomethane, it is similar enough to be injected into the gas grid.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew, I wonder, how has this technology evolved and how clean is the energy generated from organic waste?
Okay, if we start with looking at the different technology, there's three different markets that we need to look at. First of all, the sewage industry, and AD has been used for well over a century for processing sewage, so it's well developed in that area. The other two markets is, first one to look at is energy crops. A lot of farmers actually put slurries and energy crops, mix them together and put them through the AD process. And that is well developed. I mean, there's over a decade of sort of experience within that area. And to that end, if we look to our European neighbours, there's around 6,500 plants operating out in Germany, processing mainly slurries and energy crops. And then we turn to sort of the waste industry. Now, there's two aspects of that. There's one where food waste is being co-digested with energy crops and slurries. And that is reasonably well understood and reasonably well proven. But the area where you're looking at of only just processing food waste through AD, there's only a handful of plants in Europe. And so there's a lot of experience to be gained in this area and technology to be developed. And related to that is how clean is the actual AD itself, the technology. Well, a few statistics in here. The Committee on Climate Change is setting a target of 50 grams per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. Currently, that's at around 500 grams. Their target is 50 grams, so there's a long way to go in there. If we look at things like incineration, what we have in there is typically the best ones are around 350 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour produced. A lot of them are over 500 grams. And when the comparison was done with AD, that's working out at 11 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour produced. So, you know, very, very impressive figures behind that. And also the studies that's been done on AD with actually the comparison, the global warming potential of actually putting waste through AD as opposed to putting it into landfill. And what they've found is that landfill is incredibly damaging to the environment, and AD is a big improvement in terms of the CO2 saved. Now, the difference between putting a ton of waste into landfill and putting a ton of waste through AD is about 900 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So again, very, very impressive figures behind there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. To what extent has AD become a hot topic over the last 5 years? Paul, yes, please.
I've been writing about waste management for probably about 7 years now. I think it wasn't until the 2007 waste strategy that I'd actually even heard the words anaerobic digestion. Then all of a sudden that was the key thing that was in that document. And after that there was a bit of a pause where if you excuse the pun, everyone digested the fact that anaerobic digestion was in there. And then all of a sudden over the last 3 or 4 years, anaerobic digestion has really started to take off, and we've seen a lot more companies that have been investing in it, the likes of Biogen, Greenfinch, all of ADBA's members. I think, there's no doubt, because of not just the economics, but the CO2 savings potential, or CO2 equivalent savings potential, that now AD is still the hot topic that is on everybody's lips in the waste management industry.
Excellent, thank you, Paul. If this technology is the panacea, why is it there are so few AD plants in this country? Paul, you mentioned there's 6,500 in Germany. I think there's only 40 large-scale operational plants in the UK. Is that correct? About 40?
Oh, yeah, there's about 40 plants.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's around 40 plants operating in the UK, but a lot of those are actually farm-based plants. There's only still a handful of actually plants that are processing food waste.
Okay. So what's holding the UK back? Why is it that we are 6,460 plants behind Germany, for instance, other than the obvious size of the population?
I think there's a few issues around what's holding the UK back. First of all, as I said, it wasn't until 2007 anaerobic digestion became a big deal, and then suddenly we have a major financial crisis that's made financing of these plants quite difficult. But we've also seen a lot of issues around planning with them as well. Local authorities are very nervous about any sort of waste facility, and anaerobic digestion equally applies to that. There have been campaigns lodged against anaerobic digestion plants, normally around issues around transport and lots of lorry loads of waste being sent to facilities. But I think planning and finance would be the biggest issues. Probably, Andrew, you could expand on that more than I could, really.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's quite a few plants that have got planning permission. What is holding them up is actually the financing behind them, actually getting funding to do them, because they're quite complex projects. There's a number of inputs going into it in terms of actually waste and gate fees and securing those markets in the long term. And that leads into sort of local authorities having sort of spending cuts in there, so that there aren't the long-term contracts that are around. But also there's a lack of understanding, I think, in the banking fraternity about AD and sort of how it operates and how it works. But certainly I would agree, planning it is quite difficult in terms of achieving it. A lot of it is to do with the location of where the actual site is, and actually engaging in with the local population as well, so they actually understand it, because there's a problem within there with actually people understanding what AD is all about. I think when they get hold of it, understand it, and can understand the benefits, they're actually pretty sold on the whole idea behind it.
I mean, certainly with PR, I mean, you mentioned PR there and engaging with the population. I think Paul may have something to say about that. I know in the past you've talked very loudly. How do we overcome these hurdles? How do we get the population to agree and understand what AD is all about?
Right, I was starting to feel a bit left out there, so thank you very much for that. I think, for starters, I just want to say I hate anaerobic digestion. I'm a PR man, and if you want to give me something to try and sell to the general public, please don't include the word digestion in it, and don't include a word like anaerobic, which the majority of the UK population can't spell. So we're going to have real difficulties communicating what this technology is. I love the technology. When you actually see it, it's simple, it's clear, it's very easy to explain to people. But in our experience of going out and talking to the general public, what we find is an immediate knee-jerk reaction to the idea of somebody building something they clearly do not understand. And when you start to explain to them that it's actually food waste that could be processed, there's two problems. The first one is that terrible W word, waste. In my experience, where I've done planning in lots of different areas, waste management is unique in terms of the reaction you tend to get from the general public. Yes, there's other areas where people will be a bit excited, but when it comes to waste, I find it very difficult to find communities who really want waste facilities built near them. And if people have had a different experience to that, I'll be very interested to find out about it. So the starting point is, this is waste. We don't want it anywhere near us. It's a process we don't understand. If anybody wants to see the reaction, you can go onto my company's website, Proteus PR, and look on the TV section, and you will see some vox pops we've done with the general public, where we went out and said, you tell us what anaerobic digestion is. And I'm sure that people here, if you're working in the sector, you won't be surprised at the horror that people are filled with, and the ideas about anaerobic digestion. It's got to be something you get when you go to hospital, like one of those germs that's going to kill you or something like that. I hate the name. So if you're going to try and communicate to the public, you must have something which is talking not about the process, which is what anaerobic digestion is, but talk about what's good from the process, what the benefit is. Public like energy, they use it every day, they understand it. People like the idea of cheap energy and increasingly green energy. So anaerobic digestion, once you get past that initial reaction, you tend to get a positive response, but it's hard work from the early days.
Very good, thank you. So is the answer then to call it AD without an explanation as to what the initials mean, or is the answer to find a new name for the process?
Well, personally, I'd like to find a new name for it, but unfortunately, the name is out there. It's been out there for quite a considerable period of time, and I think we have to live with it unless somebody's prepared to stand up and come up with a new name. I got quite excited about 2 or 3 years ago when David Cameron gave a speech where he said he was personally committed to anaerobic digestion. He thought it was a great idea, and I live in his constituency, and we do have an anaerobic digestion system in there, but most of the public are unaware of it. To the public, what anaerobic digestion is little slop buckets, and this is to the Daily Mail as well, is slop buckets in their kitchens to collect wastes. And we have to get over that. And if we can actually explain to them that once we get past the name, if we had a different name it would be easier, but without a different name we've got to work with anaerobic digestion. And what you have to do is push to the end result, not talk about the process, but say this is what we're going to do with your wastes. First of all, reconnect the population to their waste because they think it's somebody else's problem. For the last 30 years, somebody's turned up on a Thursday morning and taken their waste away to be disposed of. So it's got nothing to do with me. Somebody else has got to deal with that. So you can use anaerobic digestion to get the public to appreciate that actually there's something positive they can do about the environment every single day by separating out their food wastes. And if you start from that end of the equation, so you can do something good which is going to generate energy, you tend to get a much better reaction. So to answer the question, I would rather have a different name, but if you're going to give me AD, we'll still try and sell it. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Will some critics be sitting out there rolling their eyes and saying, what are we doing? Do some people simply believe that AD isn't as great as we make out?
I think they're wrong. There's no doubt that AD is a fantastic technology. There are some doubts around it which I think have to be acknowledged. One is that it's a biological process, so they're not necessarily easy plants to run. They need a lot of care and attention, but there's no danger from the biology inside them. There are going to be issues around vehicle movements. That's always a big issue for people with waste facilities of whatever type, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed. There's also the issue of the digestate, and we have a huge shortage of phosphates in this country and around the world, and anaerobic digestion is a good way of producing a nutritious fertilizer. Whether the farming community will actually want that fertilizer is a completely different matter, and it could be that the digestate is actually of more benefit as an energy fuel, dry it out and incinerate it, and there could be issues around that as well. Maybe Charlotte might have better views on that than I would, but I think there are certain issues that have to be addressed by everybody involved who are stakeholders.
I mean, Charlotte, what do you think about digestate? Is there a better way of dealing with it rather than putting it on the land at the end of the process?
Digestate itself is if you look at the whole digestate, it contains valuable nutrients that went into the process in the first place. So we absolutely cannot lose those. what is exciting over the next few years is that there are increasing developments in the process of treating the digestate, which can both separate out the water content, which then means you've got lower carbon costs of transporting it to land,
Yes.
separating out the fraction that contains the nutrients, so which is the bit you want to do, and then leaving the rest as a soil improver. But there's a lot of innovation in that area coming forwards, which will allow us to get the most from digestate. But fundamentally, it's a very valuable product.
That's the good news, but what's the bad news? Where is the bad news? As a skeptic, where is the bad news? Is there any?
I don't think there's any.
I suppose it's just that there's not enough plants around at the moment to process all the waste. That's the issue with where we stand at the moment. But I think that is changing.
Okay. And that, as we've already decided, is partly due to funding and partly due to public perceptions, planning.
For me, I think that the biggest barrier to the AD industry at the moment is about clear messages coming from government stating that there is a clear role for AD and what that is. I think if you're a local authority, it's very difficult to know what you should be doing with the different wastes you've got to manage. You're under lots of pressure to keep your costs low, and you're already tied into long-term contracts. And the government is sending out quite mixed messages about what is the best treatment for organic wastes, and its view that it wants to leave it to the marketplace.
Okay.
And that isn't good enough. Clear messages from government would solve many of our problems, principally giving confidence to the finance sector, because those messages will ensure that we get the feedstock that is essential to driving the plants.
I think the overriding message that always comes through in any of these debates is clear and concise direction from the government. I think it's a single message that comes out. We touched on this a little bit really, but what is the public perception of AD, and is this changing?
Yeah, I think the perception is still that the situation is that the vast majority of people still do not know anything about anaerobic digestion. The number of plants which are out there is very small, and certainly I just wanted to pick up on something that Charlotte was saying, because I actually think it's a very critical point. I feel at the moment, though, we haven't got any leadership coming from this government, and I think on this particular issue specifically, what you need to do is explain to the population why organic wastes need to be separated out in the first place, and the benefit that can come from that. When people like Andrew turn up, Andrew's vested interest is all over him. He's a businessman. He's going to make money out of this. And to a host community, then they're not really going to trust Andrew to begin with. He can build trust over time, but they're not going to do it to begin with. And I think there's a lot of core messages about why AD has a role to play in our renewable energy market, why it has a role to play in our waste management industry, and the central government should be one of the people who are funding and helping those messages to be delivered. And at the moment, it's just not happening. Mixed messages, absolutely. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast out there at the moment in terms of what they're trying to come up with as solutions for organic waste. And we just need some clarity on it. And if you remove the vested interest of the developer with those messages, the population will listen to them and start to think about this in a much more sensible way. I think the other point I was going to make about people's perceptions is my problem with a lot of the guys I work with is we, as PR guys, we tend to get called in quite late into the process. The site has already been chosen, and I walk on a site and I'll sort of look around and there'll be some rather beautiful houses just behind this hedge. And I says, well, you know, those houses are only going to be 300 meters away. I think you're going to have a problem with the local population, and we'll start targeting our communications that way. Choice of site is absolutely critical in my view. If you've got a good site, which is not messing about, if it's well away from the nearest neighbour, it can make a fundamental difference to the acceptability of this solution. Because local authorities, in my experience, want it. They want that organic waste stream out, the collection authorities do. They want it out, they want it taken away, and they want it processed. And when you talk to councillors about this process, they love it. It's a great solution, you know, get taking this such a heavy part of the remaining waste stream out and processing it.
Okay.
I'd just like to mention something that Charlotte mentioned earlier as well, which is the biomethane, the actual gas that comes from the process. I think that's something that we can, you know, really educate the public with, because everybody, well, most people have central heating, and it's something that we do like to have to keep us warm. And natural gas is a resource that in the UK we're running out of, and we're having to import it from the likes of Ukraine and Russia. And I think if we can educate people that we have this amazing resource that produces our own natural gas, then that would be a real benefit for helping people to understand what the technology is all about and why they should separate their waste at home.
And why wouldn't we do it after all? Yeah. Okay, thank you. What role do we each have to play in the development of a mature AD industry in the UK? What can organisations such as an open-ended one, but what can organisations such as ADBA do? Where can plant designers and operators lead the way? How can media help? And does the government need to do more? So I think we've answered the does the government need to do more, but if we could start with you, Charlotte, perhaps as to what organisations such as ADBA can do to help this situation, that would be excellent. Thank you.
I think there's quite a lot that we as a trade association can do in the first place, but on different levels. In the very first place, it's all about education and being really clear about what we would like government to do. I think we've talked about from a planning perspective, general population and councillors really need to understand what AD is about, what it can deliver. So we need to get much better at communicating the benefits of AD so that we all understand it. I think we need to be promoting greater recycling and trying to encourage the government to increase the UK's recycling target, which is exceedingly low at the moment at 50% by 2020. And then as far as our own industry is concerned, we need to be understanding all of the issues that make it challenging to finance as a technology. There's a large range of variables and a large range of risks. So if you're a banker looking at whether you want to finance it, you could argue that the IRR or return is not high enough given the sum of the total risks. So we can look at each of those and break it down. We're also developing a best practice scheme for the AD industry so that we can ensure that we as an industry operate according to the best practice available. And reduce the financial risks in investment, and developing more training and support for our own members is the best that we can do.
Okay, thank you. Where can plant designers and operators lead the way?
Okay, splitting that into two halves. I think with design, they need to be robust, reliable, and fit into the landscape, being obtrusive to the local public, and not affect people as well, which is really important. So design, strong design is absolutely critical for the success of the AD market. But also strong operation. These plants need to be run reliably, they need to be efficient, they need to be able to provide a service for their customers so that they can be relied on. I think that's really, really important for the future.
Thank you. How can media help? What can the media do?
I think obviously the trade media are always going to be interested in technologies like this because they're preaching to the converted. In terms of local and national media, they don't have any compulsion to do anything about AD. It's for us to go out there and convince the media that they should. The only interest they'll have is in bad news. So if, for example, there's opposition to a plant, then they'll report on that. They're not going to report on the fact that this amazing new £20 million anaerobic digestion facility is being built that's going to treat food waste in your area. They don't care about that unless somebody gives them a good story that explains that people we're going to be getting clean energy that will will benefit them as individuals. So there's, as I said earlier, there's no compulsion on the media to do anything unless we give them a reason to do so.
Paul, taking it to the other extreme, if the government was to employ protests, how would you help to promote the AD industry? I mean, it's a very brief question with only a couple of minutes, but apologies for that. Is there a way forwards? Is there something that you could recommend that the government does?
If there's anybody from DEFRA here, I'd like to have a very long conversation with them after this, but very briefly, I think there are two things that I'd be recommending that they should be doing. I think the first one is that we already have a body created by the previous government to communicate on recycling issues and waste issues, which is RAP. A lot of their national campaigns which they've run have actually been fairly successful. When you look at the data in terms of message penetration across all audiences, they've been fairly effective. So we have some people there who know how to communicate central messages. And I would say to them, well, let's use those people. Let's work with the industry to come up with the effective arguments in favour of AD, and let's work with an organisation like RAP to get some of those messages out there to explain to the public the benefits that are going to come from this process. Because in straight marketing terms, what you don't want to do is start talking about the detail of the process itself. I think the first thing you have to do is identify what the problem is. There's an issue here that needs to be sorted out. And when you've explained to them what the issue is, and we all know what that is in terms of the nature of trying to dispose of this waste and also generate some good green energy, that's fine. I think once we've explained that there's a problem, then we can explain to the public that there is something that they can do about it. So that when they've had those background messages which puts into context anaerobic digestion, people like Andrew and members of the trade bodies who go out there to try and get planning permission will suddenly find a much more informed audience who will be receptive to some of the messages. But I still fear that because it's waste, there's still going to be a proximity principle you're going to have to take into consideration, which is that those people who live too near the site won't necessarily want to listen to the developer. But you will stand a far better chance if you have those central messages delivered, talking about the background, about why there's a problem that needs to be sorted out. So I think that's one area of communication. The second area of communication that I would like to see perhaps some leadership from the government on, perhaps in terms of some funding, is to try and help trade bodies to come up with standard sets of arguments and share information between developers. One of the problems you get into is a lot of developers are entrepreneurial types, and they tend to keep sort of quite isolated to themselves and keep their own experiences to themselves. And I think we do have to share our experiences about what's the best way to engage with communities to get them to host these facilities. Because we can learn from environmental pressure groups. They're very effective at going out there and talking to communities, and they share information using the internet or whatever techniques they want to use. And we should be learning from them about that process. And I think if we do that, I think it'll make a fundamental difference to the success rate of anaerobic digestion planning applications.
I think these pressure groups are very good at using very emotive words, waste incinerator and things like this, which really stir the population up. Finally, we're just sort of running over now, so I wanted to sum up with, is it possible to sum up the future potential for AD in the UK? I'd ask you please to be brief, because I'd like to ask the audience some questions. So, very briefly, Paul, is it possible to sum up the future potential in AD? Do we have one?
We definitely have a future for AD. It'd be wrong to say the future is limitless, but you know it's going to play a huge part of the UK's energy capacity. It's not going to compete with nuclear. AD incineration isn't going to be the panacea that will solve all of our energy problems in the UK, but it's going to play a very important part, and there's no doubt about that. I think, Charlotte, you mentioned it was 40 terawatts potential of energy, which is quite a huge amount. And when you add that to the likes of the biomass plants that are going to be built, when you add that to the likes of solar energy, wind power, renewables will play a big part, but still around probably 15 to 20% will still need other sources of energy to heat our homes and power our TVs and radios and the like.
Okay.
Just very quickly, I think there is definitely a future for this industry, whatever it might be called in the future. And I do think we need to be ready for the likely reaction that we might see under the localism bill coming through in spring next year. Because I think, again, the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of the communities I've spoken to about what the localism bill means, it means that they can decide what's going to be built near them. And one of the problems you're going to face as an industry is lots of these plants are quite small, so they're not going to go through the Infrastructure Planning Commission's route, whatever it's called now. They're not going to go through that route to get planning permission. You're still going to go through the local authority. So, you're not going to be able to rely on them to give you the permissions. But if we can get past the emotional reaction to what the guts of this industry is, I think you'll suddenly find there's a population out there prepared to engage. Because it means every single day they can do something positive for the environment. And in my experience over the last last 10 years, there's been an exponential growth in awareness of environmental issues, and in particular climate change. Having just been in Australia last week, the population in Australia doesn't need to be spoken to about what climate change is. They accept it. I think with the exception of ClimateGate a couple of years ago, I still find that when I'm talking to communities, people are very worried about climate change, and when you start showing them the scientific evidence about the problem, they want to do something about it. Well, here's something tangible they can do every day, and I think they'll be much more prepared to accept these plants if you can engage with them from that end of the equation rather than the process end.
Okay, thank you. Charlotte?
Yes, we've already mentioned what we think is the potential of the industry in terms of quantity of energy, but I think one of the great things about AD is its extraordinary flexibility to fit into lots of different types of locations and provide a wide range of solutions in terms of energy. So as the UK's energy mix evolves over the next 40 years so that we meet our 2050 target, AD can adapt as we change the way we fuel our homes and drive our cars. We can generate, at the moment, generating biomethane, injecting that into the grid and using it as a transport fuel is the most efficient. But if we ultimately move over to a more electrified system and heat our homes using heat pumps and air pumps, well, then we can also generate electricity. It's that great flexibility that will allow us to evolve and retain our place in the future energy mix.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
Okay, well, AD has appeared back on the Archers, so it must be high up on the agenda. But what we're talking about in here is 18 million tonnes of food waste potentially in the UK, 100,000 tonnes of animal slurries, and DEFRA projecting 1,000 on-farm AD plants and potentially 100 to 150 food waste mercantile plants over the next 10 to 15 years. So it's looking like there's going to be huge potential growth in the market.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's an excellent presentation. I'd like to thank all of my guests here today. I'd like to now throw it open to the audience if there's any questions that you might like to ask, and see if panellists can answer those questions. We have a microphone if there is anyone who has a question.
Could I ask, can you hear me okay? No? Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Great.
yes.
It's a question relating to the scale of AD facilities. We have an AD facility very close to our office in Oxfordshire. I think it's about 2 megawatts. What do the panel believe is the future in terms of the scale of AD? My take is at the moment there is still very much an agricultural mindset to the scale of operation. Would you like to comment on that?
I think that's probably one for you, Andrew. Is it, yeah?
Does that work? Yeah, okay. I think there's going to be two typical scales of plant. I think you're going to have the on-farm style plant, which I think are going to be typically under 0.5 megawatt, particularly if they're related to a dairy enterprise. There may be a few of those that get bigger if they're purely putting energy crops into them, but I think the on-farm one is typically going to be 0.5 megawatt or less. When you're looking at dealing with food waste, scale is required because they're a lot more complex and capex intensive. So the plant that you've got near you, 2 megawatt site, will be sort of under 50,000 tonnes of waste going into it. So I think that will be quite a size of plant that we'll see quite a lot of around the UK. There may be one or two bigger ones as well that come out of there, but I think the 2 megawatt plant will be quite a standard issue.
Yeah, do you see a conflict between AD and IVC facilities? So when they're mixing in food waste with garden waste, do you see that as possibly inhibiting the development of AD?
I don't think there's a real conflict, although there will be a period of time where the technologies will be the existing IVC plants will be looking for the same kind of feedstock that the AD plants coming on stream will be looking for. But fundamentally, they are two different technologies which are actually quite complementary. So as we move forwards, I think the perception will be that AD makes the most of most organic wastes, but there is always going to be a role for IVC and composting, because AD doesn't process well the woody kind of waste. And composting, I think, is sometimes put on the back end of an AD plant as well to help treat digestate. So I think there will be a process of evolution as a lot of feedstock that is currently going into IVC plants will slowly move over to AD, but there will always be an ongoing role for composting in IVC, I think.
Thank you. Hey.
Hi there, it's not really a question, it's just an update really, a bit of comfort factor for the audience. My name's Ian Boyle, I work for I'm Head of Agriculture and Renewable Energy for the Royal Bank of Scotland Group. We've already launched our wind and solar renewable energy unique kind of package, and I'm about 3 months away from launching the AD finance package, predominantly aimed at the agricultural world. I've been out to see Charlotte and the team, the NFU, CLA, etc., and it will more or less form the basis of taking all the feeding tariff into consideration to help service the loan. So, you know, a bit of comfort and light at the end of the tunnel that we've woken up to it. You know, I'm well on the track with it. I'm about 80% through the policy regarding the risk people behind the scenes, and we'll train the 200 odd managers up on the renewables just as scientifically as we have done on the wind and solar on the AD and in time biomass. So watch this space, probably January, February time, but we'll come out with more similar dance and AD policy.
I think that's excellent. I think HSBC have also woken up to it as well. So. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late for your presentation because I was listening to Dr. Liz Goodwin, who's the CEO of WRAP. One of their principal campaigns is called Love Food, Hate Waste. The more successful they are, the less successful the economics of AD relying on food waste. So how do you resolve that conflict?
I totally agree that first and foremost we need to be reducing the amount of waste we generate in the first place. So we totally support WRAP's campaign. But there will always be a degree of residual food waste. Potato peelings, banana skins are not very edible. Equally our population will be growing over time, and as we move towards source segregated waste collections to extract the organic fraction, we will continue to generate a very significant proportion of food waste as a feedstock. There is also slurries, which are a feedstock, purpose-grown crops, and sewage, the sewage industry, which may well be becoming deregulated. So there will always continue to be a very strong supply of feedstock.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit to that. I mean, we take a lot of local authority waste, and picking up the point here about the stuff that's coming into it, there is an awful lot of peelings, food scrapings, rather than actually whole fruit or out of sell-by date food. And I agree with that. Absolutely, we, as an industry, want to support actually minimising waste as much as we possibly can. But there are undoubtedly, there's a lot of issues within the industry. That we get things like freezer breakdowns, there's human error, there's process runs, that all of those things will continue to happen because there's human error that sits around it. But we do need a good place to actually put that waste that actually turns it to best benefit.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found that interesting today. I certainly feel I've learnt a lot from our panellists here, and I'd like you to please join me and put your hands together in thanking them for attending this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much.